protected by the state. And members of the society who are supposed to be protected by the state are always at war with the state for getting their rights enforced, recognized. So this is the incongruity that we see in this context. That is why there is an American social philosopher called Benjamin Tucker, who lived during the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. He observed that state is always representing wicked forces, whereas society is the dearest possession of man. Even prior to Benjamin Tucker, you might have heard of another philosopher, Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau's masterpiece is on civil disobedience. Mahatma Gandhi, even in an open letter to the American people, recognized that Thoreau was his teacher. Thoreau said that government is best which governs least. But in the modern welfare state, we have that government which governs most. The more the governance, the more vulnerable the rights and interests of the society or the individuals. Even further back, a random check through the corridors of the history. Why was Socrates forced to take poison and die? Because his rights came into conflict with the prerogative, power, authority of the state. All revolutions recorded in history are due to this conflict, never-ending conflict between the individuals or people on the one hand and the authority or the ruler on the other hand. Magna Carta was signed in 1215 as a result of this conflict. Bill of Rights as a result of this conflict. And this conflict has reached a revolutionary proportions and even bloodshed. 1648, in the Civil War, Charles I was beheaded in England. And even monarchy was abolished. When people lose their temper, lose their patience, there will be bloodshed and revolution. If you don't have bread, why can't you eat cake? And if that is the environment that is created by the state, there will be use of guillotine. And state in any form is an engine of repression, suppression, oppression. Even in a democracy, even in a socialistic system, Karl Marx said that once there is the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, there is no requirement of the state at all. But we found that the state was there from 1917 till 1991. Gorbachev came with Glasnost and Perestroika. Marx said, state shall wither away. How state withered away? In the area where his ideology was enforced. So this is the background. This is the background against which we have to see this concept of fundamental rights and the enforceability of fundamental rights and the environment against which fundamental right either flourishes or is defeated. If it is participatory government or participatory system of state, as we had in the ancient city-states of Greece, or the Mahajanapadas of ancient India, down the foothills of Himalayas, there will not be much of a conflict between the ruler and the ruled. But here, once the constitution comes into existence, the state tries to enforce its authority. If you want to recognize and identify the citizens of the nation through a legislation, you have to implement or you have to enforce a law prescribing certain parameters, certain fundamentals, certain grounds. That will definitely lead to opposition by at least a section of the people, which we have seen now in India, what is staged. Thanks to, and these administrators are for the time being saved, thanks to Corona and this pandemic. See, you take any administration. I am not making any political observation. This is purely an academic observation. I too have political views. You also, all of you will have political views. But the given situation, this is a position. And what was the condition before the constitution? Before constitution came, we know what happened in 1757. We know what happened in 1764, Battle of Buxar, Battle of Plassey. We know what happened in 1857, the first war of independence. We know what happened after that, 1858 Government of India Act till 1947 Indian Independence Act, the British who came here as merchants. Through competition they became master merchants, then they became merchant masters, and then they became masters alone in 1857 and ruled India till 1947. What was the clash? It is always the interest against. Mahatma Gandhi fought a non-violent struggle, but violence was there in the first instance itself, 1920, when non-cooperation movement started. 1922, there was Chauri Chaura. There was Jallianwala Bagh. So there will be friction always with the authority. So every authority, every person, be it a police officer, be it a minister or a secretary, IAS officer, even a judge, once you feel the power, you will be under some tension. Why? Because you know that those against whom you are using your power, you are not using it, you may not be using it correctly or evenly. So this is the position with respect to the institution of the state. Then what is the concept of the state? Concept comes into active play in Article 12 of the Constitution of India. See, you know how Constitution is implemented through the courts. Courts cannot go on declaring principles of law. For declaring the principle of law correctly or incorrectly by the judges, by the court, there should be a situation, an occasion. A list should be there, list. There should be a list pending before the court. And that is what I told you last day. The Constitution of 1950 and the Constitution of 2020, entirely different in quality and reach. That applies to the concept of state also. In 1950 or in the 1950s, state was rigidly, narrowly interpreted by the court. You know what is the process, what is the ultimate or what is the fundamental judicial process that is going on in the courts, especially in the higher courts, high courts and Supreme Court. While adjudicating a list, the court would be interpreting the rules, provisions of law applicable to it. We call it in the statutory interpretation ascertaining the intention of the legislature. So the court will, by ascertaining the intention of the legislature, the court is undertaking an exercise of testing the compatibility of the issue at hand and the law available. Suppose your right is infringed by a private person or a private institution. You approach the High Court with a writ petition for enforcement of your fundamental right with a prayer for an appropriate remedy. Then the court will examine. The court will come to the conclusion that you don't have the locus standi to fight this case in this court because the person against whom you are seeking relief before us is not coming under the purview of the operational area of the concept called state. So what I mean to say, initially there was a strict approach to the state. You know the ingredients of Article 12. I will just rush through it. Unless the context otherwise requires, this state includes the government and Parliament of India. There is no controversy. And the government and legislature of each of the states. There is no dispute there also. And all local or other authorities within the territory of India or under the control of the government of India. It is in the second part. All local or other authorities within the territory of India or under the control of the government of India that these disputes take place. So it is here that the court, I will furnish the judicial process attached associated with this interpretation of Article 12 and application of the principle of state for enforcement of the fundamental rights of the citizens over these 60-70 years. So in the 50s and 60s, till Mohanlal's case came, Rajasthan State Electricity Board versus Mohanlal, 1967. That is a landmark decision. That is a watershed area occasion for interpretation of Article 12 of the Constitution of India. Before that, we had Shandabai versus University of Madras, Ujjambai's decision, which all Ujjambai doubted Shandabai. Shandabai held that a university cannot be a state, and something like that. But in Mohanlal's case, and after Mohanlal's case, a new era has dawned with respect to the interpretation of Article 12 of the Constitution of India. Especially this the second part, other authorities and the government controlled organizations. And after that, and the test that was provided by the Supreme Court, immediately after that came other decisions also, including Ajay Hassia versus Khalid Mujib. You can find any number of decisions. That is why I am going with the broad principles, and consult any text on constitutional law. You will get a catenary of decisions on each and every point. What we have to keep in mind is to have an understanding of the correct perspective under which we have to approach this area. So the test applied was the concept of instrumentality and agency test. Instrumentality and agency test. That is a device, a tool, a concept, a test devised by the Supreme Court of India. And the author of that rule is a judge from Kerala, Justice K.K. Matthew. And his son is now a judge in the Supreme Court, Justice K.M. Joseph. So Justice K.K. Matthew's this development of the concept of instrumentality and agency, it is very easy. See, as Cardoso said, ultimately it depends on the personality of the judge, the eruditeness of the judge. This instrumentality and agency test provided a solution as well as what Karl Marx said in political science Supreme Court of India achieved in the area of jurisprudence. Ultimately, the state shall wither away. This rigid state, the rigid state concept has withered away with this. You will see, with this, we are living under a system where a government which governs most, all areas where Article 19(1)(g) is applicable, government also has entered for its operation. Be it contract work, be it mining, be it hoteliering, be it industry, be it small industry, large industry, medium industry, everywhere the state has entered like an octopus, spread its tentacles. And enterprising entrepreneur, their position will be very vulnerable, very difficult, with the state wielding this power. So once you employ this concept of instrumentality and agency, if it is university, if it is a nationalized bank, if it is a government corporation, if it is a government company, if it is a company in which government has got majority shares, if it is an entity having enjoying the grant given by the government like the aided schools in Kerala under the KER, Kerala Education Act and rules. See, this instrumentality and agency test has clinched the issue associated with the interpretation and application of Article 12 of the Constitution with respect to the concept of state for enforcing the fundamental rights under Part 3 of the Constitution. And what happened today? What is the position today? Today, the position is state has withered away fully. Supreme Court has employed cleverly, ingeniously, constructively achieved a deconstruction of these conservative principles and a reconstruction of certain proactive dynamic principles through active interpretation. So today's position is, this question of state is not at all an embargo for a citizen to enforce his rights. The question that the court examines or looks is not even instrumentality or agency of the state, but whether this entity is discharging a public function. So that has broad-based the operational area of this concept of state. Now here, some of the cases which you should not lose sight of, cases which lay down the law. Just you can see, AIR 1967, Supreme Court 856. Supreme Court delves deep on local government. What is a local government? That is Ajit Singh versus State of Punjab. What is meant by local government? So one is local authority, one case. Then a test to determine the local authority was AIR prior to that. AIR 1952, Supreme Court 115. So in Mohammad Yasin versus Town Area Committee, Supreme Court laid down certain parameters for testing. One is whether it has got a separate legal existence or a corporate body, or it is a government agency, independent, legally independent entity. Then whether it is functioning in a defined area, a particular area, specified area, wholly, partly or indirectly represented ruled through the representatives of the people of the area. Then it enjoys a degree of autonomy. Then it is entrusted with functions through a statute passed by the legislature. Statute. What is the difference between statute and law? all laws are not statutes, but all statutes are laws. And in the, you might, I don't know whether you have had your paper on statutory interpretation or it is yet to come. The interpretation process is interpreting the statute with respect to the given occasion. Here, what is examined in Muhammad Yasin's case, one of the earliest decisions, these parameters you examine and whether it is available, it will be state and it can be enforced. Then 1954 Madras 67, there is one decision. These are even High Court's decisions. Even High Court decisions are path breaking in the earlier point of time. And after Shantabai's decision is 1962 Supreme Court 1621, Ujjambai versus State of UP. There the Supreme Court in Ujjambai's decision, this principle of ejusdem generis rule of interpretation was employed by the Supreme Court for interpreting the situation. As we have found, what is the mechanics of ejusdem generis rule of interpretation? If there is an enumeration of identical or similar words, phrases, names in a statute, followed by a general word, that general word will take the meaning of the earlier specified words. Then there is another decision, AR 1962 Supreme Court 797, that is with respect to the territory of India. Mastan Sahib versus Chief Commissioner. Territorial jurisdiction of Article 12. Courts held that it is guided by the provision of Article 1(3) of the Constitution. Now comes another controversial entity with respect to state under Article 12. Whether judiciary comes under Article 12. As far as the cases are concerned, cases decided by the judges, the court are concerned, you cannot file a case against the judge saying that the judge through this order has violated my fundamental right. They are protected under the Constitution as well as under the provisions of law like Indian Penal Code, Section 78 and 79 and all. But the institution judiciary, whether judiciary is amenable to the writ jurisdiction or the enforceability of the concept of state under Article 12. What is the position available today? Judgments are spared. Judgments are not attacked or challenged. But you know, from the administrative side, the court's decision can be challenged through the Registrar General or through the Secretary General. You might have come across this decision of Delhi High Court where Registrar General of Supreme Court versus so and so regarding the amenability of Supreme Court to the jurisdiction of or the sweep of the Right to Information Act 2005. So the concept is judiciary also is amenable as the concept of state under Article 12. Now, a new that we will discuss in detail when we discuss the doctrine of judicial review. In the Supreme Court, the system is you file a case, get it dismissed, that is the end of it. There is a provision for a review. You file a review, 99% of review cases will be considered in the chamber of the judge itself and dismissed. But in 2002, court developed 2003 developed a new system called curative petition. Curative. So why I have brought curative into the discussion of Article 12 of the Constitution? Curative has opened the gates of, if at all any restrictive sense attached to Article 12, that is also now gone. Because even judiciary is to some extent on its judgments also, it is amenable to the jurisdiction. Curative petitions are filed and heard by a bench of 5 judges, including the judges who heard the cases earlier. So this concept of state, we have now reached a position. I will just sum up the discussion on the concept of state. We have seen that it is a tool effectively used to enforce fundamental rights, and the courts which are having jurisdiction to issue prerogative writs conducts this test with respect to the violation committed by the authority and determines the decision or determines the issue. So this is state for the purpose of the fundamental rights. Now the second principle, because this part 3 of the Constitution from Article 12 to 35, it forms the core of the constitutional law, core of the Constitution itself. So the concept of law enumerated in Article 13 of the Constitution of India. So what is law? For the purpose of enforcing fundamental rights. We have seen that state is not that political organization called state for the purpose of fundamental rights. Here, law elaborated in Article 13 of the Constitution of India is for the purpose of the fundamental rights. See, when Constitution was inaugurated formally on 26th of November 1949 and officially on 26th of January 1950, already we had a large chunk of laws. We had laws, enacted legislations from 1860, and if not enforced, we had other legislations also. And law, you learn in a more philosophic manner in your jurisprudence classes. How state build bonds with the citizens through the bricks called laws. So laws are efficacious as well as inimical. Some laws we want to enforce more and more. Some laws we don't want to enforce in any way at all. You don't want tax laws to be enforced, whereas you want all beneficial legislations to be enforced. And here again, you are not enforcing the Constitution or provisions of Constitution. Provisions of the Constitution, including Article 12 and 13, are only tools, enabling provisions, channels for undertaking the journey. And This is used when laws come. You are confronted by or confronted with principles of law. You have to remit fees. You have to give taxes. You have to pay rent. You have to maintain accounts. You have to take a license. You have to remit fees for examination or for the course. So many things are there. Law provides, law mandates, law commands. Command of the sovereign, you study. Definition of law. Law is a command of the sovereign. What type of sovereign? Who is not in the habit of listening to the commands of any other entities. So here law comes. It is a democratic law. It is a popularized law. Popular law. And that is Article 13 provides a random reading, just like I read to you Article 12. Article 13 has got 3 parts. All laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement. That is pre-constitutional laws, we call. So this first is pre-constitutional law. So so far as they are inconsistent with the provisions of this act, shall to the extent be void. So it is a negative provision. They did not say it in the other way around. As far as it is consistent with the provisions of the Constitution, they are valid. It is not like that. It is called a negative capability. It is something like a non-obstante sense. I don't call it a non-obstante clause. What is non-obstante clause? A provision of law beginning with a negative word, notwithstanding this such words. That is non-obstante. So it is with a non-obstante sense. Even though it is with a non-obstante sense, it conveys a positive meaning that if it is not repugnant, if it is not in conflict with the laws already existing. We have contract law, we have civil law, we have procedural law, we have property law, we have company law, we have any number of laws even prior to the Constitution which came into force in 1950. So they are to be saved. Otherwise, see the laborious exercise which the Parliament has to undertake, enacting all these laws again, legislations on again. Then second one, the state shall not make any law. The state shall not. You know the difference between shall and may, might have studied. Shall is mandatory. May is directory. May is mandatory some occasions. That you learn in interpretation. The state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the rights conferred by this part, and any law made in contravention of this clause shall be to the extent void. This is with respect to laws enacted during the Constitution. So the laws during the constitutional period and pre-constitutional period, this is not controversial. See, Article 13 is the sheet anchor on which the entire body of laws, legislation is tested. It is a touchstone. It is a touchstone. It is a sociological principle as well as juristic principle. You might have heard of a book written by a foreign jurist, Indian Constitution, the Cornerstone of a Nation. Austin's book says that Constitution of India is not merely a document of legal principles, but it is a document for India's social revolution. That is correct in a way. We abolished untouchability at the stroke of a single article, Article 17 of the Constitution. We have expanded the scope of right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 like anything. And we have even effected, as I told you last time, redrafting of the Constitution in certain vital areas. So, all with the help of this changing contours of the concept of law under Article 13 of the Constitution of India. Now comes the little controversial part of Article 13, that is Article 13.3. See, Article 13(3)(a), law includes, see, here again comes the enumeration. Any ordinance, order, bylaw, rule, regulation, notification, custom or usage having in the territory of India the force of law. See the expansionist definition of law. If you are asked to define law, you just quote Article 13(3)(a), even though it is for the purpose of understanding and interpreting the fundamental rights, particularly, and constitutional provisions generally. Here, law means, or laws include, not merely legislations passed by the state legislature or parliament. You know, you cannot enforce an act passed by the parliament without framing rules for it. Rules are not enacted by the legislature. Legislature will delegate the power of rule making to the executive, and executive, without violating the spirit and the intention of the legislature, will frame rules. See, this law under Article 13, having a mere piece of legislation is nothing. It can be a law which is it is dormant. You can enact a legislation and send it for sleep like Rip Van Winkle for 20 years. So Article 13 deals with laws passed by the legislature, rules framed by the executive, then orders issued by the authorities. See, legislature, executive, individual authorities, rules framed by the authorities, and order, notification, bylaw, then, and custom and usage having the force of law. While studying the sources of law, you study custom and usage as a source of law. Here, custom and usage as a source of law, here in Article 13 also, for implementing, enforcing the fundamental rights. That is the main principle. There is one more Article 13(3)(b). Laws in force includes laws passed by or made by a legislature or other competent authority in the territory of India before the commencement of the Constitution and not previously repealed. So that is only an explanation to the earlier portion, Article 13(1). Now, regarding the course undertaken by this concept of law under Article 13, just listen to me for with rapt attention for one submission, that Article 13 viewed closely has got four aspects. One is it has got a retrospective effect. Second is it deals with the future laws. Third is it tells what is meant by law. And the courts have developed certain doctrines to interpret and understand this provision of law in the Constitution. I will name two doctrines: doctrine of eclipse and a doctrine of severability. See here, even though we will be discussing judicial review in a separate context with a detailed approach, it is here that the court exercises its discretion, the court exercises its erudition, the court exercises its judicial mind while taking decisions, while interpreting decisions. Because the presumption is that no law passed by a legislature is invalid. No law is invalid. All laws passed by the legislature are valid. That is the presumption. Therefore, the burden of proof is on whom to demonstrate whether the law is valid or bad under the Constitution of India. The person who comes to the court challenges has the onus to do it. Suppose one provision of a law, there are 10 provisions of a law, 3 provisions are unconstitutional, ultra vires, not sustainable. 7 provisions are sustainable, enforceable, constitutional, constitutionally valid. Then court applies the doctrine of severability. Doctrine of severability. Because you sever those 2 provisions which are unconstitutional and you save the other rest of it, as the court did in A.K. Gopalan's case. Preventive Detention Act section 14 was struck down. Even though A.K. Gopalan did not get any relief, that section was struck down. Then severability, the act was saved. So this is Article 13, and we have a number of decisions here where Supreme Court has come across situations to deal with. One is a resolution passed by a government under a rule. That is also law under Article 13. AR 1954 Supreme Court 493. Then a government notification under Commission of Inquiries Act. I will just rush through these enumerations. A notification or an order under a statute, an administrative order, but administrative instruction is not within it. Then a custom or usage, bylaws of municipal or statutory body, regulations made by a statutory corporation of life insurance corporation or government company. So these are all law within the purview of Article 13. What is the difference between administrative order and administrative instruction? Administrative order will be issued on the basis of taking inspiration from a piece of legislation, a law, whereas administrative instructions are ad hoc in nature, contextual in nature, not always having the force of law. So we have the principle, or we have this Article 13. Why Article 13 is there? What is the functional? What is the requirement of Article 13? To test the constitutionality, intra vires, sustainability of all laws passed by the legislature, or all laws enumerated in Article 13(3), and all decisions taken on the basis of the laws and laws enumerated on Article 13(3). That this principle is included. These 2 fundamental basic concepts of state and law, state under Article 12 and law under Article 13, decide the fate of the fundamental rights, decide the course of enforcement of the fundamental rights in India by the courts. This is the discussion, preliminary discussion on that.